I'm gearing up for my second tour, and I knew the gunnery sergeant I was currently serving under was a Christian. And so I pulled him aside one day before we left, and I said, I know you're a Christian, and just so you know, I'm a Christian, and I don't know how you justify what we do. How can you be a Christian and also have been in the Marine Corps for 20 plus years? And he was like, look, there's violence and warfare in the Old Testament, so like it's okay. God commands it, and we carry it out, right? Well, I've also heard when I was in boot camp, we were allowed, like the one break we got a week was an hour-long church service we were allowed to go to. And I'll never forget, I went to a church service one particular Sunday, and the chaplain stood up and he said, you all, like you recruits, right, you all are the instruments of God. I'm thinking, I don't feel like an instrument of God. Like I don't feel holy. I don't feel righteous. I don't feel justified in learning how to kill. So all that to say, the question of the Old Testament was sort of a burning question I had when I went to Denver Seminary. And I had a wonderful professor at Denver Seminary named Dr. Daniel Carroll, who is the Old Testament professor. He teaches Old Testament ethics. We would always ask him these kind of questions, and he always had this great response to it. There's a difference between prescription and description. So in the Old Testament, because it's describing something, doesn't mean it's prescribing it. In other words, in the Bible, you can read stuff, and just because it's there, it doesn't mean it's telling you to do it. Sometimes it's just history, or sometimes it's poetry, or sometimes it's, God forbid, ironic. Recognizing the genre and the tone and the historical context and all those things are extremely important. But that's a particular example where just because it's in especially the Old Testament, it might just be describing something. And read the context closely. It might even be a lament. It might just be God saying, this is the thing that happened, but we can't do this again. Let's learn as we move forward. So there's all kinds of ways, I think, to read the Bible, obviously, but that's one particular way I think you can approach the Old Testament through a peacemaking lens. You know, as Christians, we read the Bible through the lens of Jesus Christ, through the lens of love God and love neighbor. And that should color and nuance everything we take in regards to the Scripture. I had this burning question in my head. Was I justified in what I did? So what I did with that question is in my second tour in Iraq, I got online, and in between tours and deployments, I graduated college. And so my second tour, I get online, and I apply to Denver Seminary. I said, I really want to answer this question. Can I be a Christian and a United States Marine? So I go home, and I started to study, and I entered into some really special and I think holistic and healing dialogue that pointed me to Romans 12 and 13. Which is a passage in the Bible that throughout the ages of Christianity, Christians have turned to. And it's a really interesting passage because both just war people who say war is totally fine, Christians can participate in violence, will turn to Romans 13. Just before that, pacifists and just peacemakers will turn to Romans 12. And they've always sort of been at odds. So when my professor said, if you really want to understand or answer that question, were you justified in what you did as a Christian, that's the place you need to start. I would say it is never appropriate for a Christian to pick up a gun and go to war and kill people. And at the end of the day, that's the mission of the Department of Defense. But I know as a Christian, my call is to something different. It's to respond differently than the government tells us to respond. It's to respond differently than mass media tells us to respond. Now there's sort of this governing statement in my mind. When we're attacked and people say, well, what are we supposed to do? Just let them kill us? Is that what we should do? And the question I want to put back on that person is, who is the we? When you say that, are you saying your community of Christ? That's the we? Should we as Christians just let them kill us? Or is the we the United States of America? You is a patriot. You is an American. And how are those two identities at odds with one another? And for you, which identity trumps the other? And how do you work through that complexity of, I'm an American, and I'm a Christian, and my government's telling me to go to war? And what identity are you responding out of? Your Christian identity, or your identity as an American?